And first of all, of course, let's start with Ukraine. What will 2023 be like for Ukraine, and what are the expectations of the European Parliament regarding Ukraine? Do you think that the war will come to an end next year?
First of all, best wishes to you too. Well, naturally, we do hope so that that the war will end in 2023. We are doing everything possible to stop Putin from having the resources to continue his war, and of course then to bring him to justice. As last plenary, we called Russia a state-sponsored terroristic state. So these are things that we hope will be favorable for Ukraine, because really this needs to end as soon as possible so that everything can go back to normal. Both all the people that were displaced from Ukraine and of course other countries, and of course in terms of economic situation. We know that now in winter, in terms of energy, it is very difficult for many of Ukrainians. So we need to stop it as soon as possible before another winter comes, when there might be even less resources. So yes, all the sanctions, there is upcoming 9th package of sanctions towards Russia. I do hope that really they are starting to have effect.
So we have just mentioned about the difficulties that the European Union countries are facing right now because of sanctions. So will it possible that these difficulties might shake somehow the strength and unity of the Europe?
Very important question. I do think that in terms of people, citizens of Europe, of European Union, they stay very much supportive of Ukraine. But of course there are, as you mentioned, difficulties that these people are facing, and based on how each country deals with these difficulties, then I think it will showcase in national and European elections on who will people vote for. You know, who manages the crisis well will of course be re-elected, and who won't manage it well, or there will be you know, an image of the parties that they did not manage well, then they will probably lose in the elections. And it's a question of who is the upcoming political force in Europe. I am a little bit concerned in this regard. I am afraid that in the times of war, people tend to trust, you know, those who make very strong statements, but oftentimes strong statements lead to authoritarians and dictators. So I do hope that the crisis will also end really soon, because then we won't be afraid of these parties and politicians taking over.
So let's start talking about Georgia. What awaits Georgia next year, and what is the most important for Georgia, of course? Will Georgia receive the candidate status of the European Union in 2023?
Well, of course, now, as far as I know, are being finished all the documents regarding the 12 points from the Commission and Council, and how they were fulfilled or not by Georgia. At least the deadline is the end of December. So for 2023, I do expect that this will be the main topic for the relationship between the EU and Georgia, how the reforms are progressing, and whether there is finally the time for Georgia to receive the candidate status. As you probably know, I oftentimes supported that Georgia receives the candidate status. So honestly, I really do hope and believe that 2023 is the year for Georgia in this regard. But of course, it doesn't mean that the work on reforms will end. You know, even if Georgia receives the candidate status, which I think is really important for the mood and for motivation, you know, of everyone, then there will need to be a progress and continuation in more work on reforms. So there's a lot of work ahead for Georgia, but I do hope that a lot of hope too.
Are you personally hopeful about the chances of Georgia to receive this status?
Yes, personally I am quite hopeful, and I do think that it will happen for you in 2023.
Oh, great news, really. So, an increased role of our region in Europe's energy security, particularly Azerbaijan and Georgia, brought our government to the conclusion that Georgia might get the candidate status even without fulfilling the 12-point plan. Do you agree with this?
I do not really think that is entirely possible. Of course, it will depend on the negotiation and what the Commission will assess is the best way forward. I would think that it would be the best way, because personally I see that there is a lot of demotivation and also continuous polarization because of the candidate status. So I do think that if the candidate status was given, then we could talk about the reforms more calmly and rationally, and it would not just be about the candidate status, you know. So that's my opinion, but of course Commission or Council might have a different opinion and say, no, the rules were stated clearly, you either fulfill 12 criteria or not, and then you either get the candidate status or not. So I also, of course, respect it. That's very understandable. It's just that I see maybe more personally what's going on in Georgia, and not technically, but really on a personal level. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned whether the technical level is really the only aspect that we should be looking at.
So, and the final question, what will be your advice to the Georgian government on the one hand, and on the other hand to the Georgian civil society and opposition?
So, the advice to government, of course, I'm a different politician, European politician, but if I were to give advice, it would be to really start more focusing on what is going on in Europe and why we are doing what we are doing. There is no one in the EU that would try actively to block Georgia from getting candidate status. We just need some rules to be fulfilled and some reforms to see, and some will, you know. So please really think about this. We are not your enemies, but we also don't want to be abused. We want to be partners. So that would be my advice to government. As for civil society, I do know that you are in a very difficult situation because your political spectrum is very polarized and there is a lot of emotions, and it's always difficult to work in this environment because you have very good ideas about reforms. So my advice to you would be keep connecting, keep networking with each other, with your European counterparts, with us, and just keep hopeful, because the time will come when really your ideas will be able to take place. So keep pushing them, because, you know, when the situation is calmed down and, you know, you get candidate status and everything, there will be really the time and place for all the ideas, for all the reforms, and for Georgia to get closer to Europe. So that's when your time to shine will come.
Thank you very much for the very interesting interview. And again, I'm very grateful, as the whole Georgian society, for your continuous support and friendship of Georgia, and hope to see you in Georgia very soon.
Thank you very much, and I wish you and everybody a great rest of holiday and start of New Year.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye. Bye.
Bye.